hopefully you're in ballroom A. I know you're that, but hopefully you're in the right spot. Our next speaker is Mr. Darren Yon, and he is the Technical Support Manager for Landmark Spatial Solutions. He holds a degree in forestry from the University of Georgia, so we got a dog coming up here. It's exciting for me. He's going to provide information on drone technology, and specifically he's going to address concerns, applications, and improvements. But there is a detailed bio going around, and I actually want to use this opportunity to plug the app if you have not downloaded this. If you're technically challenged, they can help you at the registration desk. But it's very handy. It has the schedule, sponsors, exhibitors, and it has speaker bios as well. So it's very useful. If you haven't downloaded that, please look into doing so. So with that, Mr. Yon, you come up.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? Sometimes I'm kind of soft-spoken, so I want to make sure you can hear me okay. Well, let's get started. My topic is going to deviate just a little bit from what was in the flyer, so I thought we need to spend a little time on maybe on some regulations because there's some common misconceptions there. So let's get started here. A little bit about my company first, if you don't mind. We'll put a plug in. Landmark Spatial Solutions. We are a forest technology solutions provider. We mainly do sales training and tech support. We branch out a little bit on some project consulting as well. But our slogan is Forest Technology Simplified, and that's really what we try to do, is to help our customers, through the tough times, getting up and going with technology. Here's our customer base. We're primarily based in the southeast. I live in Warner Robins, Georgia, and my partner Johnny Thompson is located over in Starkville, Mississippi. And but we cover clients, all up the eastern coast, lake states, and a few out west. We're probably known more for GPS technology. We've been doing that for quite a while, since probably 2002. And we also do some GIS sales and support, forest measurement equipment, and forest inventory software. Okay, these are some of our business partners. You may have seen some of those before. And well, enough about that. Let's get on to the real business while we're here and talking about drones. So what I want to do is start with talking a little bit about drone regulations, and then we'll jump into types of drones and some applications, and then concerns along the way for potential users. And so let's get going. All right, drones really are the buzz. I mean, literally, they make a pretty loud buzzing sound like a swarm of bees when you fly one, especially the quadcopters. But everybody has seen something in the news, advertisements. Amazon is trying to start a service where they can drop packages on your doorstep, and use something like this big blimp thing at the top left there to reload all their drones and send them back down with new packages. We've seen Domino's Pizza experimenting or thinking about doing drone deliveries of pizza. How would you like that? Sit in the backyard on the picnic table, and Domino's drops it right on the table in front of you. That's living, isn't it? And it may be in the future that these drone deliveries may upend some of our postal service workers or FedEx or UPS. So. You've probably seen in the news, I've seen a couple of news stories about drone swarms used by the military. It's kind of an interesting concept here. Some of these really small drones can actually do facial recognition. They can send out a swarm of these things and look for a fugitive in crowded areas. And then when their mission is done, they just crash and self-destruct. So pretty interesting stuff there on the military side. And then we use drones for entertainment. Anybody seen the Super Bowl earlier this year? At halftime, not only did you get Lady Gaga, but you got a synchronized drone show right there that went on too. So example of that, actually it was flown the day before. It was a video. And as we talk about the regulations, you'll see that it really was a feat to get permission to do that kind of drone display. So last one is drone racing leagues. In a world where we're apt to race anything from a camel to a riding lawnmower, there's also drone racing leagues out there. I stumbled across something on TV the other day where some guys are going through an obstacle course with their drones, so all kind of uses. And drones make the ultimate, or I should say, like my 10-year-old daughter says, that's the coolest selfie ever. And I would put a picture of me on there, but this guy had me one up with the drone on top of his head right there, so I'll try to outdo him next time. But let's talk about what is a drone, getting started. Well, drones are an unmanned aircraft system that is regulated by the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration. Okay, they make the laws for the man-made stuff that flies. Okay, so drones usually carry some type of own payload, like a camera, some other type of sensor. And as I'm going through the presentation, you'll probably hear me use several terms synonymously with drones, like a UAV, a UAS, or a SUAS. I probably won't use that one, but that's a small unmanned aircraft system. Okay, so just wanted to define my terms there. And so jumping into drone regulations, and there's really 4 ways to fly a drone, as you can see here. Illegally, fly it as a hobby, commercially, or government use. So going to help you determine which one are you, or which one are you likely to be. Okay? Drone technology really exploded, starting maybe around the first time I'd ever been exposed to these things were probably around 2010. And technology was developed, drones, software to run these things, but we were hamstrung and waiting in the gates because of regulations. Okay? So it took a couple of years, or a few years, for regulations to become such that we could fly drones commercially. In 2014, the FAA put out some pretty strict regulations under Section 333, and what it required was to have a licensed pilot on site, and you had to request or submit for a Section 333 exemption, which could take up to 6 months. So pretty time consuming, and think about it, you got to trying to find a pilot who would rather be flying really than being out there on site with you. But fortunately, in the end of August 2016, the FAA released some new revisions to that under what is called the Part 107 provisions. Much less stringent, and now it only requires that the remote pilot have some certification instead. Okay, and we're going to go into that in just a minute. Okay, just some interesting trivia. Before the Part 107 regulations came into play in mid-2016, it was estimated that there had been 2 million drones sold in the U.S., but the FAA had only issued less than actually 5,000 333 exemptions. So a pretty big bottleneck right there in getting approval for commercial flights. Okay. Another thing about drone regulation is if you're a government employee or work for a government entity, you can indeed fly under the Part 107 rules we're going to talk about in a minute, or you can apply for a certificate of authorization. Okay, so you've got a couple of ways to be legal there. Okay, this may be a little bit controversial, but hobby use. Okay, the way the FAA looks at hobby use is pretty much from like a Webster's dictionary definition, where they're calling a hobby a pursuit outside one's regular occupation and engaged in especially for relaxation. So does that describe the way you operate your drone or think about operating a drone? Okay, so whereas commercial use is flying as a service, where you may be selling photos or videos, something like that, or monitoring progress of a job, that kind of thing. And if you want to, if you really want to compare hobby and commercial use, it's really the way the FAA looks at it. Not me. FAA looks at it as it's all about your intent. Is somebody benefiting from the flight? Okay, and if it is, then they very likely consider that commercial. And note that no money has to change hands for that to be a commercial operation. Okay, so I'm just reporting the laws as they are. So let's look into the eligibility requirements under the Section 107 or the Part 107 rules. All right, a pilot has to be minimum of 16 years old. You got to read, write, and speak English. And you got to pass an aeronautical knowledge test. Now, hold that thought right there. We'll come back to that in just a minute and go into a little more detail. You've also got to pass a background check and obtain a pilot certificate after you pass this test. After that, you got to pass another test every 24 months to retain your certification. And you've got to agree to conduct pre-flight inspections and maintain your drone. Okay, so I know maybe a deterrent to somebody wanting to become a licensed, UAV pilot may be the knowledge test. And I just want to go over some details about that. It's a 60-question test. It's multiple guess, A, B, or C. So you should have a chance of scoring a 33 on it right from the get-go. And $150 fee to take the test. And just some of the materials I was reading, they estimate that it takes somewhere between 10 and 20 hours of prep time to take the test, and you must score 70 or better. Example right here is one of the questions that is in the study guide, and it was actually one of the questions on the test I took. Okay. Here's some of the topics that are on the test, and unless you've got an aeronautical background, it's probably not something you're familiar with already. So just to reiterate, there is some study time involved here. So you got to know the regulations, a little bit about airspace, or a lot about airspace and requirements, and weather, to name a few. So one of the things that took me most of the time in studying was learning about the airspace system. What is controlled airspace? What is not? Another thing was reading a sectional chart. If you're a pilot, this is second nature, but if you're not, it takes a little bit of time to understand these things. Okay. With the test, there's plenty of training centers all across the U.S. There's probably at least 20 or 30 in Georgia where you can take the test. After you pass it, you apply for your certification. And then once you get your certification, you are required to keep that on site with you during all missions. Okay. Getting back to the regulations again, now that we know the eligibility requirements, a lot of these are just common sense. Don't fly over people or stadiums. Okay? Don't interfere with other manned aircraft. You gotta give other aircraft the right of way. No flying near emergency responders. As you can imagine, this has been done and got some people in trouble before. And no drinking within 8 hours of flights. So the hold my beer, and yeah, that's out of the question. Okay. All right. Some more requirements. You're required to fly below 400 feet above ground level, below 100 miles an hour, during daylight hours, and also during good weather conditions. Okay. You can't fly multiple UAVs, like you can't control a swarm of them right now. You got one pilot, one UAV. You can't carry hazardous materials, and you got to yield the right of way. We've already mentioned that. You can only fly in controlled airspace, okay, with air traffic control approval ahead of time. So a good rule of thumb is don't fly within 5 miles of an airport, okay? And you've got to maintain visual line of sight. That's another kind of sticking point right there that's tough for us right now, that I have hopes that the FAA will go a little lighter on this to give us a little more area that we can cover with the visual line of sight rules. This reminds me, while we're talking about the requirements, some of the rules, like no drinking within 8 hours and flying during daylight hours. I don't know if you remember back in 2015. You remember on the news story about the drone that crashed in the White House lawn? You heard about that? Okay. Well, first we thought it was the Russians, but no, it wasn't the Russians. It was actually a geospatial scientist, and I believe he was a government employee who went out one Friday night, had a couple of drinks, got back home by 11 o'clock, decided he's going to fire up the drone and take it for a spin. Well, he lost control of it, radio control, and it flew several miles down the road and ultimately crashed in the White House. So you can imagine, I bet he had some splaining to do after that. But he was really fortunate that he didn't get prosecuted for that. But I'm not for sure, but I think that some of those, some of the parts of the requirements here could have stemmed from that incident. Okay? All right, if you need to, or if you think you need to fly outside the rules, you can request a waiver from the FAA. Okay, here's a list of some of the things that you can request waivers for. Okay, and when you request them, it's not just, hey, I need a waiver. Well, you got to give some justification for it. You got to provide a safe alternative for the operation, and then the FAA has to approve it, get back to you, and they may also give you some other provisions you've got to follow. So it's not I don't think it's a simple process. And right now they're saying that the lead time is about 90 days, but I've heard recently that they're striving to get this, the lead time cut way down. Hopefully, yeah, 90 days is a long time. Okay, but we've been talking about the FAA laws. Well, our state also has some drone laws, not nearly as many as the FAA, but here's a few of them. Okay. The Georgia drone laws, and I want to, maybe I should preface these by saying these are the thou shalt nots, or maybe even better, maybe we'll call these the redneck rules, okay? Because instead of thou shalt not video or photograph someone else's personal property without permission, okay? Invasion of privacy issues there. Interfering with an emergency scene or personnel is a violation of Georgia law. Flying in and around certain locations such as the Capitol, okay? Probably stemmed from the incident at the White House. Okay, I love the fourth one right there. If you arm or use a drone as a weapon, you may be a redneck, or you may be in violation of the Georgia drone laws. Okay, if you lose your drone, you can't recover it from somebody else's private property without permission. Okay, kind of like chasing your dog down. Okay, and I love the last one here. This is going to break some hearts here, but you're not supposed to use drones for hunting and fishing, or interfere with somebody else that is hunting, fishing, or trapping. Now, I think that goes without saying. If somebody flies a drone around your deer stand, you're probably gonna bring it down for them. And so another thing about the drone laws is Georgia tries to limit what local governments can do. But there is some exceptions to that. If there was an ordinance in place, a local ordinance that was adopted before April 1st, 2017, it's okay. Now this affected me. I live in Warner Robins, and there's probably about a 7 or 8 square mile area in town that the local government deemed as a no-fly zone. So and they were rushing to try to get it adopted before the deadline. Okay, and they can or they will not prohibit local governments from prohibiting launch or landing from public property, except if if you're using it for commercial purposes. Okay, so some considerations about drone laws, and we'll get to the fun stuff, looking at actual drones and uses in just a minute. But how are you planning to fly? Are you gonna try to do it legally? You're gonna try to get by without it? You're gonna use Part 107. Section 333 is still in place. You can still fly under that if you want to, or a certificate of authorization for government workers. All right. Do you need a waiver? If you're thinking about, if you're considering flying legally, commercially, and you want to take the Airman's Knowledge Test, I highly recommend doing an online training course. I did that, and I think it was money well spent. A couple of $100 to do it, and it did take me a couple of Saturday afternoons studying up on that stuff, but it did prepare me very well to take the test. A lot of the questions I saw on the sample quizzes, exactly what I saw on the test. And if you're thinking about, hey, this may be too much, I think I'm just going to contract out my drone work, be aware, look for somebody that's licensed or certified. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I did read an interesting article the other day that mentioned that if you knowingly hire a hobbyist instead of a certified pilot, that you could be held liable. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just I wanted to make you aware of that stuff. And you need to know and stay abreast of the FAA state and local regulations. I was kind of surprised by some of the stuff I found looking online for those. Okay, enough of that boring regulation stuff. Let's get on to the cool stuff. Let's talk about drone hardware. All right. When you think about drones, we really got 3 basic types, if you want to call it that. The first is the fixed wing. These are the large ones. They can be, pretty large in size, but they're limited to being less than 55 pounds. They're faster. They can fly long flights. They're definitely more expensive. These things can cost you, I think the one in the picture here is maybe somewhere around $25,000. Okay, so they're not cheap. They're mostly used for aerial mapping, and we'll talk about some applications in a minute, but mapping would be the main purpose for that thing. And you need to be more careful with takeoff and landing. It does take a bigger area to land that thing. You got to be really careful with it. Okay, the next type is a rotary wing, and these are probably what you might be way more familiar with, like the one I've got on my in the exhibit hall, one that I've got sitting on my table there. These are relatively inexpensive. The one in the picture here is a DJI Phantom. Okay, they're a good consumer grade model, and this particular company owns a lion's share of the market for rotary wing drones. This model right here probably ranges in price anywhere from, I'll just say, $1,200 to $2,500, depending on options, that kind of thing. But these are easy to operate. Anybody can fly one. Doesn't take a lot of training to do that. They are compatible with iOS and Android tablets to do mission planning. We'll talk about that in a minute. And flexible payloads, they come with a pretty good camera on board already, but you can also add other sensor devices if you like. Okay, the last type is a hybrid. This particular one is a Firefly 6. This is from Bird's Eye View. This one's probably in the $8,500 range, but it's like the name implies, it's a hybrid. It is a combination of the two previous types. The advantages here are you can fly it like a fixed wing, cover the area with the speed and the flight times, but you got a much smaller takeoff and landing area. Okay. All right, so let's get into some applications for drones. And really there's going to be about two major types of applications that we see right now. And the first would be an inspection. Okay, we're just flying up and we're going to take some video footage, or we're going to take some still shots from the drone. And so easy to do, and I'm just going to use the DJI Phantom right here to give you some details about that. So we've got the drone, we've got the camera on board. You've got a controller module shown right over here. This is what you'll be running with the joysticks, and you've got a tablet there that allows you to do your mission plan. And then here's a screenshot of the software on board. Okay, where you can you can determine the elevation that you're going to fly to. You can start the video, stop the video, that kind of thing. And I should say there's some fail safes in place on these also. So if you get out of radio contact, you can have it so that the drone will return home to where it took off. So all right, and there's a variety of smart device apps that you can do this mission plan or job planning on. Okay, here's a more detailed shot of that application. This is running on an iPad right here. Okay, so what you can do is this is just a still shot from a camera. Okay, but some of the work you can do as far as inspections go would be stuff like looking for bug spots, trying to stay ahead of them, monitoring their progress. This is a same type of thing. This is some dieback out west in California, and where they're tracking disease, and you got definitely fire hazards there because of the dry climates. You can use drones for storm damage inspections as well. One use, harvest inspections. You can look here. You can look for missed drags of wood. BMP compliance, that kind of thing, before and after shots, before and after the harvesting job, maybe a video as well. Here's another harvesting application right here. Maybe you just want to see how much has been cut so far, what's left to do. SMZ inspections. This could be maybe you fly this ahead of time and look at the conditions, maybe before and after a crossing, if you had to do that on a harvest job. This is a stand density. Maybe this is something easier to look at from the air, where you can look for skips and misses and areas of low density or wet spots. Here's another good one on regeneration. I wouldn't really want to walk through a lot of that kind of stuff. I'd rather fly the drone up and take a look from the air. Planning inspections, okay? Hopefully your planners will want to do a better job if there's an eye in the sky looking after them, okay? So another good use for that. Drainage or beaver damage. I wouldn't want to walk through that stuff. I'd rather send the drone up and take a look, make assessments there. Using it during controlled burns, looking for jumps, looking for how far your fire has made it off the brakes. Kind of thing is an excellent use. Okay, this is a post-burn evaluation, and you can see got a little hot in there. Back when I was in operations, we call that tightening up the bark, and so hopefully we won't have to go back in and do any cutting after that. Okay, this is a site prep activity. Okay, you see we got a roller drum chopper over there doing a nice job of site prep in the flatwoods. Okay, a good way to monitor the progress of a contractor's work. Making sure he's getting good coverage. Here is site prep evaluation, looking at putting in some beds. Okay, so a lot of, before we get into mapping, there's a lot of other applications I'm sure some of you are probably flying drones and doing other stuff with it. I'd really be interested in hearing what you're using them for. And so let's get into, we'll get into mapping workflow next. And what we mean by mapping is we're actually going to create aerial photos, ortho rectified photos, or 3D models, flying similar to what a normal manned aircraft aerial image mission would be like. Okay, we're just doing it on a smaller scale with a UAV. So really the workflow is taking an app either on your computer or on a smart device, choosing the area of interest, laying out your flight lines, uploading this mission wirelessly to the drone, autonomously flying the mission. What we mean by that is you hit the button to start, the drone picks up, goes to the starting point, flies the mission. Let's just say that there is you can't do it on one battery. Maybe at 20%, the drone will fly back home, allow you to hot swap the battery, hit start, it'll head back and pick up where it left off. Really, really neat technology. Once you're finished flying the mission, the drone can come back and land where it took off or some other location, and you can download the data from the device. A lot of times this can be on like a micro SD card. You can just pop out and move that over to your computer. Next step is processing the data either in some desktop software yourself, or you could use some type of cloud-based service. Okay, and the end result is creating a 2D mosaic or a 3D model. So there's a lot of apps on the market that'll help you do this stuff. I've got an app here called Before You Fly. Now this won't help you do it. This will help you determine if you can fly safely. This is an FAA app that, it just helps you determine if there's any restrictions in your area before you fly, hence the name. Okay, there's some, DJI has some good apps that'll help you fly inspections, but there's others for doing UAV mapping. A couple of these in particular, certainly not an exhaustive list here, but Maps Made Easy and Pix4D Capture are a couple of them. And a lot of companies will develop apps and at a low cost or maybe even free, for you to use in hopes that you will want to use their service to process the imagery, because that's really where they're going to make the money. Okay, so here's an example of the mission plan. On a smart device, you can just take your fingers or a stylus pen and you can outline the point of the area of interest using your finger. Just define the area you want to fly. And this is uploaded to the UAV. And here's an example of, here's the flight lines it's going to fly, and you can watch it as it's flying. You can keep up with where it is. I'll show you over here. Where it's flown, and these little dots here are the pictures that it snapped along the way. And the goal is, after the mission, in the processing software, it's going to stitch all these together and come up with an ortho mosaic or a 3D model. Okay?
So that's on the app?
Yep, you can see that live on the app. Okay? So I think we've talked about this there. While you're flying the mission, If you need to regain control at any time, you can. You can tell it to fly home. If you get in a situation where the wind picks up and it's too high or it starts raining, you can hit the home button and it will drop off from its mission and come back home. Okay, as far as the forestry mapping applications, as we mentioned, the 2D mosaics and the 3D models, let's look at some cost comparisons on these, okay? Because I wanted to show you these because I think it's a common misconception that, hey, I got this drone, I can do these inspections for the cost of an app to help me. But if I want to do actual mapping and create these mosaics or 3D models, yeah, there's some additional costs there that you need to know about. There's a popular software on the market called Agisoft, and $3,500 one-time fee that will process the imagery. Probably their major competitor in the market is one called Pix4D, and you can see the price for that. You can either rent it by the month or year, or if you want to buy it outright, it's $8,700 plus a yearly maintenance fee. There's another application called Drone to Map that you can use for folks that are using ESRI's ArcMap, ArcGIS products. This runs inside of ArcGIS, about $3,500 a year for it. Or you can use some cloud-based services like Drone Deploy, okay, where you can just take, when you finish flying the mission, you can upload your data to a cloud-based service, and they'll process the data for you and send it back. Another one is Maps Made Easy. That's another cloud-based app, and they will charge you on a per-mission basis. And there's a lot of options there depending on what you want as a result. If you don't need a 3D model, you can cut your costs a little bit, and it really, they bill you depending on the number of flights, the number of pictures that they stitch together. Okay, here's some examples. Here's a high-resolution orthomosaic, and I wish I had another slide that would show you what it looks like when I zoom in, but this is probably a 40-acre flight right here, and if we were to zoom in, the pixel size is going to be probably within a couple of inches. Okay, if you've done any GIS type work where you've done stand delineation, using something like a NAPE image, for those of you that might know what that is, those images are probably a 1 meter pixel, okay, and then we're working here with pixels that are tiny. Okay, so you can imagine it is quite a bit larger file size wise, but you can zoom in and you can just see little seedlings. You can see the shingles on a house. And it's pretty amazing the resolution you can get on some of these photos. Okay, here's an example of that same mission where you could rotate this thing and get a 3D model. You can start looking at tree heights, that kind of thing too. Another thing you can do with that 3D model is you can get the volume of log decks. Okay, it's one application. You can also do stockpile volumes like a chip pile, a rock pile, some type of aggregate. Okay, it makes it, facilitates getting that 3D volume there. Okay, you can certainly use the 2D mosaics for doing stand type mapping or stand delineation, even seedling survival or a survival assessment. Okay, in this example right here is 6 acre track where it's been processed so that each of the seedlings has been identified for you to get back in there and count. Okay, you could also do something where you manually put in plots by taking the photo and zooming in and using a software like ArcGIS to put in buffers around some sample points, and you can manually count the number of trees in those. Okay, here's another survival example using an algorithm that is recognizing the seedlings and showing them up in red and putting a little circle around them. Okay, here's another example of what's possible. This is using an additional sensor on the drone for NDVI. This is looking for plant health. So you can look for stress points in your stand. This is actually comes from an ag field, but you could do similar things in forestry. And like I said, you would need an additional, like this would be a near infrared sensor you need to add to your drone to be able to get this type of data out. Okay, what's in the future? Well, that's really, we're still trying to figure out what we can do with these things now. There's a lot of uncharted territory here, but We have been able to determine tree heights and tree counts with remotely sensed data, and and that's working for some folks. For inventory work is good enough for them. I don't know if it's good enough for a timber sale. Maybe it is. If you can add a little bit of ground data to that for maybe product, determine the product mix, that kind of thing. I have heard tales of drone swarms flying through the forest and scanning to get the tree dimensions, tree counts, heights, everything like that. So really, the sky's the limit on this stuff. It's just, like I said, we're just hoping there'll be some, regulations could lighten up as far as the line of sight rules, and maybe it could be where we can fly drone swarms. These kind of things will maybe be possible in the future, maybe with some type of exemption. Let's talk a little about hardware considerations before I go here. This is probably the easiest questions you'll have to ask yourself. Which type of drone may be the best for you? There's hundreds of models out there, but it really boils down to, what do you need it for? If you can do the, maybe the rotary wing may be a good starting point to get into drones. But if you need something to do larger areas, then maybe the fixed wing or the hybrid may fit the bill. Make sure that your drone, whatever you're using, can utilize third-party apps. I think it's pretty important because there's a lot of those out there that may be better than the basic app that comes with the device. And I'm talking about on a smart phone or tablet, that kind of thing. Do you need additional sensors on your drone? There's companies that can retrofit your drone with other, like the near infrared, other type of sensors. Okay. Get your drone registered. This is actually another law. For commercial use, you have to register your drone. Only costs $5. You got to put a little sticker on it that puts your identification number, I guess, so if you crash it, they can track you down. You may want to consider additional batteries for these things because some missions will take you a little bit of time, and you could hot swap these between flights. As far as software considerations, again, are you going to purchase or rent software? Do you want to use a cloud-based service to begin with? And I think for a lot of people getting started, just to see, what the results are, what you can do with it, the cloud-based may be a good starting point. And then maybe if you do enough missions to warrant it, then you could look at buying some additional software like Agisoft or Pix4D. Operational considerations. You may want to use additional folks on site as spotters if you need to. Make checklists to help you with safe flights. I think checklists are a good idea, just as if you were doing a controlled burn. Make sure the fail-safes are enabled in your software apps. All right, minimize public contact. I think that when people see a drone, they're attracted to these things. They want to. If somebody sees you flying one, they may want to come over there and look over your shoulder. And sometimes that can be distracting when you're trying to keep your eyes on the thing. So, for me personally, I try to stay away from if I know somebody's going to be watching me or something, and I try to stay away from people if I can. Minimize your risk. In our industry, it's flying forest is a low risk environment to begin with. Probably crashing and hurting a squirrel may be the biggest risk we have. Be safe and be professional. I think being professional, getting your certification goes a long way toward that. Use common sense. Should be a common thing. And lastly, insurance. You may want to think about insuring your drone. I know that my business partner, Johnny Thompson, he flies some stockpile missions, and to maintain his insurance requirement, there's an app called Verifly. And before he flies, he can go in and delineate the area that he's going to be in and get a per mission policy right there on the spot. Maybe only costs $20 or $30 for several $1 million worth of liability drone coverage. So maybe something you want to think about if you want to do those kind of missions. Okay. We made it. So any questions?
One thing that not being able to go through your pictures and see that, because I've had friends that have gotten busted without a license because
Yeah.
it's on a website or whatever.
Yeah. Sometimes I think about those apps that you use to fly too. That somebody could be tracking what you're doing. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Just the imagery on this is picture one's resolution is so strong. Is it a viable alternative to replace material for rock pitching?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Or like, I mean, with land companies or so that are using it to evaluate your fans and using it.
Yeah. Yeah, just knowing it's on a smaller scale. I mean, you can cover a lot more acres with a traditional flight. Well, there's some like the fixed wing. You can probably cover, let's just say a flight with a rotary wing you can do probably under 100 acres. Okay, and it's all depending on how high you fly, how many let's say with a fixed wing or a hybrid, you can cover 500 acres or more with that. So I guess it's all, in your lower altitude, you're going to get higher resolution. But yeah, there are a lot of people that are using those to, redigitize their stands.
You know anybody that's using drones to calculate inventory of wood yard?
Yeah, like the log pile. Yeah, yeah, can be done. Yeah, I need to put you in touch with my partner Johnny. He could give you the ins and outs of that. Yes, ma'am.
Were all the pictures ones that you saw after it came back, or did you see it the whole time?
Well, you can, as you're flying, you've got the app right there on your controller, and you can see the what the camera's seeing as you're flying in real time. But yeah, those are the pictures that came back that had been already processed, or the ones for the mapping section. The ones for the inspections, those were the still pics that were taken, as the drone was hovering over that area.
And you saw it in real time?
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Well, I appreciate it. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mr. Young. We certainly appreciate your comments and presentation. We have a good little break now. We have, next session will begin at 3:30. So you have roughly 30 minutes. So go check out the silent auction, please, and visit the exhibitors. Thank you for attending.